She tried to jump into the casket. Someone pulled her back. Just imagine that for a second. These are the devastating words describing 16-year-old Linda Galpin back in March of 1964. You know, her little sister was lying right in front of her, and Linda just couldn't make it real. It's this moment of raw, unimaginable grief, right? And it really sets the emotional stakes for what would become a staggering 61-year wait for justice.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unraveling a deeply tragic mystery, the story of 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson. For decades, this was literally the Elmira Police Department's oldest open homicide. It was kind of like a ghost story that just followed generations of detectives. But as we're going to see today, science, paired with just relentless human determination, will eventually crack even the absolute coldest of cases. So let's dive right into this.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the investigation, we really need to remember the victim here. Mary Teresa was born in 1951. She was the youngest of four, a shy little girl whose family had moved around quite a bit. She wore these cat-eye glasses. She even had a little fan club card tucked right into her pocket. These tiny, poignant sensory details really just remind us of her profound innocence. I mean, she was just a 12-year-old girl in upstate New York, heading out on what was supposed to be a totally ordinary Sunday afternoon.
Well, the events of that day build into this agonizing tick-tock of a nightmare. Let's walk through it. On Sunday, March 15, 1964, Mary Teresa leaves her dad's apartment around 3 p.m. to go visit family. At 7 p.m., a friend sees her heading home just as the short winter daylight starts to fade. By 10:30 p.m., her father officially reports her missing. What follows is this massive 4-day search. We're talking police, volunteers, people knocking on doors, scouring the icy woods, and it all ends in tragedy on the morning of March 19th.
A hiker and his sons actually made the grim discovery on Combs Hill Road, and the reality of the crime scene was just horrifying. She was found 7 miles outside the city in a wooded area. The cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation, and there was clear evidence of sexual assault. But here's the really crucial point. Her body was concealed under branches, dirt, and 4 heavy stones. To put that into perspective, the largest stone weighed roughly 110 pounds. This meticulous, heavy placement meant the killer wasn't rushing, right? He took a significant amount of time to hide what he did before simply walking away.
Now you've got to notice the incredible foresight of the Elmira Police Department here. At the scene, they collected her cat-eye glasses, that fan club card, and her clothing, and they carefully bagged and stored the whole shebang in a freezer at headquarters. Remember, this is 1964. DNA technology didn't even exist yet. There was absolutely no science at the time that could read what was on those clothes. But they preserved it anyway, almost as if they somehow knew that future technology would eventually catch up.
So the investigation explodes into action. Detectives are out there interviewing every man in the area, checking records at the local, state, and even federal levels. But despite all of this massive effort, within just 7 months, detectives had questioned a staggering 300 people. And guess what? It produced not a single viable suspect. The killer's name simply wasn't in the file.
The community was shaken to its absolute core by this. A reward was offered, and it was heavily funded by local residents who had never even met the little girl. By 1972, that reward had grown to $5,000. But as the years ticked by, it just sat there, entirely uncollected. Every actionable lead had completely dried up. Generations of detectives inherited this massive file, read the exact same reports, and just hit the exact same dead ends.
The decades that followed created this horrifying juxtaposition. On one side, you have Mary Teresa's family, kind of frozen in agonizing time, just waiting in grief. Her sister Linda kept calling the police year after year. Her parents passed away without ever getting answers. And then, on the other side, you have the killer. He was working as a truck driver. He knew all the local back roads. He was raising a family, living a totally uninterrupted, mundane life right there in Elmira. He was in a city of 40,000 people, and literally nobody ever knocked on his door.
So, you might be wondering, how did the breakthrough finally happen? Well, let's walk through this agonizingly slow forensic progress. Step 1. In the year 2000, so 36 years later, the frozen clothing is finally tested. Semen is found, a male DNA profile is built, but there's no match in the national database. Step 2. In 2003, more material found on her skirt actually strengthens the profile, but still no match. Step 3. They resubmit it in 2014. Empty again. The killer had never been convicted of a qualifying offense, so his DNA wasn't in the system. Finally, Step 4.
In 2022, a grant from the nonprofit Season of Justice funds advanced private lab testing, and finally, DNA was about to become the real game changer of this story.
But right as hope flared, disaster strikes. The FBI packed the DNA in dry ice to ship it to a highly specialized lab in Texas. But a historic winter storm completely shut down the massive FedEx hub in Memphis. The package was stranded, and dry ice has a finite life, right? So the terrifying question was, would 60 years of carefully preserved evidence simply melt away in a frozen warehouse?
To really understand exactly how high the stakes were here, consider this. There were only 0.4 nanograms of degraded DNA in that package. To put that into perspective, 1 nanogram is a billionth of a gram. This sample was completely invisible to the naked eye. It was literally the absolute last viable piece of biological evidence connecting a killer to a 12-year-old girl. If it thawed, it was gone forever. No second chances.
The tension was absolutely massive. The FBI's liaison at the Memphis hub initiated this frantic, ticking clock search. Agents physically scoured the freezing facility. It was described as a giant scavenger hunt to find one tiny package among millions of others. But, miraculously, they found it. They got to it just in time, moved it into a freezer, and saved the absolute last chance at identifying the killer.
So the evidence safely makes it to Orem Technologies in Texas, where they successfully sequenced the heavily degraded DNA. But since they still didn't have a direct database match, they had to pivot to something called forensic genetic genealogy. Basically, by uploading the profile to public genealogy databases, the ones where millions of people voluntarily submit their DNA, criminologists and the FBI painstakingly cross-referenced generations of paper trails. We're talking birth records, marriage certificates, all to trace the suspect's ancestry outward. It's like a giant puzzle.
And let me tell you, this wasn't a quick process. It took 2 full years of painstakingly tracing public records, branch by branch. But finally, the family tree narrowed down to a single individual. Investigators contacted this suspect's surviving son, who actually provided a voluntary DNA sample. That comparison definitively confirmed a familial relationship between the son's DNA and the unknown profile from Mary Teresa's clothing. They finally had the family line.
And that family line pointed directly to Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. He was a truck driver who knew every single local logging trail. He lived his entire life in Elmira, right under their noses. And horrifyingly, he had a documented criminal history stretching all the way back to age 17, including prior arrests for molesting 2 7-year-old sisters. He was 32 years old in 1964. The Elmira Police Department had files on him for decades, but his name had just never been connected to Mary Teresa's murder.
Murray actually died in 2004. So to get absolute 100% certainty, investigators exhumed his remains on November 5, 2025. They extracted DNA directly from his body and compared it to that 60-year-old profile. The match was definitive. The odds of an unrelated individual producing that exact same genetic result, 1 in 320 billion. No way around it. It was him. He was the ghost who took Mary Teresa.
As investigators dug into his life, they found a deeply disturbing coincidence. March 19, 1964, that was the exact day Mary Teresa's body was discovered on that hillside. Well, exactly 40 years to the day later, on March 19, 2004, Alfred Murray's obituary is published in the local paper. It praised his military service and his family life, never once mentioning the monster he truly was.
But the truth always comes to the light eventually. Set the scene to February 10, 2026. At a highly emotional press conference, officials finally stood at a podium and spoke the killer's name aloud to Mary Teresa's surviving family. It was a historic day for sure. Justice after 61 long years, making it the oldest cold case ever solved with DNA in the entire state of New York. And the profound emotional payoff of this entire saga really belongs to her sister, Linda. Now 78 years old, she stood up at that press conference and delivered this profound, just heartbreaking message. She said, "I am very happy it's finally ended. I just wish my mom was here." It's such a solemn tribute, really honoring her 61 years of phone calls, her relentless dedication, and the deep love she carried for the shy little girl with the cat-eye glasses. We're going to end this explainer not just with the resolution of a mystery, but with a really crucial warning. Talk to the children in your life. Discuss safe routes, identify trusted adults, and reinforce their absolute right to say no. Predators depend on silence and isolation. A community that stays aware, stays connected, and speaks up is just so much harder to prey on. So what steps will you take today to ensure the safety of the vulnerable people in your own community? Thank you so much for learning with me today.